Good evening and welcome to Writers on Writing. I am your host, Dr. Brenda Green, coming to you from the studios of Medgar Evers College over the airways of WNYE 91.5 FM. Writers on Writing comes to you every Sunday and gives you, our listening audience, an opportunity to hear writers from the African diaspora talk about their work, their craft, and their lives. And I'm very, very pleased to have with me on the phone this evening, Khary Lazarro. Welcome, Khary.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to talk with you this evening.
It's a pleasure to talk with you also. I don't know if you remember, but we met many years ago.
Yes, I do.
Oh, okay, at Yale. And you have, as I said before we got on the phone, you are awesome. Just to share with our listening audience, Khary Lazarro is a writer, a social justice.
Khary. I'm sorry.
Khary Lazarro is a writer, social justice advocate, attorney, an activist who's dedicated his life to the educational outcome and opportunities for young people of color at key life stages. And you are the co-founder and executive director of the Brotherhood Sister Soul. You also are a writer who's edited several books, and also you have recently published your first novel, which is very interesting, Passage,
Yes.
Your first novel. So just can we begin by just telling us a little bit more about yourself, how you came to be a social activist and find this organization and then began writing? If you can just share a little bit more about how you came into doing this work.
I come from a family of activists, people who have been involved in social change work for multiple generations within this country. People who have struggled in assorted ways for more equity and equality and freedom in America. And so that's what I was really raised around. It was the religion of my family. It's what we talked about at the dinner table. It's the books we were given to read. You know, we come from that kind of family. And so I feel very based in that, and also based in a family of artists and people who believe in a connection between art and activism, between voice and social justice. And the work of Brotherhood Sister Soul, I think, grew out of that. I mean, obviously, some of it's nurture and nature, so certainly I was nurtured in that way, but some of it's in my soul as well. And so my co-founder and I grew up together in the 80s and 90s in New York City and Upper Manhattan, and we decided we wanted to start a program together to respond to the level of violence in our community, the level of oppression in our community. And so we created a program called the Brotherhood. Initially, it served just young men. We always knew we wanted it to be coeducational, and so after a few years, it became the Brotherhood Sister Soul, and a comprehensive youth development organization that is unapologetically political, that works for social justice, and that provides deep-seated services for young people. And so I think it's a connection to my family, to my people, and certainly the very deep partnership with Jason Warwin, my co-founder.
Well, it really has really had an impact, and it's interesting how you talk about your family combining art and politics and social justice. You ended up writing this novel, and as I read the novel, I wondered to what extent this novel was autobiographical. It's a young man growing up in the 1990s, and it's very relevant today.
I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are certainly, it's a novel. It's a work of art, and it is much of it is imagined. It is not certainly my story, but there are elements of the story that are my story. There is much of me in the main character Warrior, and much of him in me. And so certainly aspects of the novel are taken from family stories and experiences and based on family characters. And then there's a deep connection between me and the protagonist. But there's also much that is imagined and that is composite and that is, the use of art in the novel form to imagine also different experiences. But to your point, yes, he's a young man based in a deep family of love. He is supported by a mother and father who are separated. His father lives in Brooklyn, his mother in Harlem, but he has deep loving relationships with both, and actually they have a deep loving relationship with each other. They just kind of couldn't work it out. And he has a wonderful relationship with his sister, and that was very important to me, that he not be portrayed as a deficit model, that it not be about the lacking of family and love in the black community. And so he's based in that. But every day that he leaves his two homes, whether in Brooklyn or in Harlem, and he walks out into the streets, he's inundated with the violence and the drugs and the oppressive policing that was so rampant in the 90s, and yet also is so reflective of what young people continue to have to face today, and the long struggle for equity and equality within the black community. And so it is based in the 90s, but it is certainly, I believe, a story for today, one that resonates today and is connected to everything from the Black Lives Matter movement to the effort to reform and transform criminal justice in this country. One of his best friends is incarcerated and in Rikers Island, and we know there's a mass citywide movement to shut down Rikers Island that the Brother and Sister Soul is, plays a role in. And so I think there are many pieces of the story that are very, very relevant today, and connected to the modern struggle.
Yeah, it's interesting also how you made the novel very literary. There's a lot of symbolism in the novel. It's definitely about memory, and I think what was really striking for me is how deeply you get into the interior life of Warrior.
Yes.
Yeah. How did you go about doing that? What strategies did you use? Because you when I think about this, I think about someone who was steeped in reading literature and writing literature. It just comes across very strongly.
I've been a writer and a reader my whole life. I wrote, poetry at a young age, and then moved to also writing essays. I've published essays for about 20 years. My first essay ever was actually in Essence magazine, and so I've always been consumed with the word, with the written word, and what it can tell and what it can do to elevate and to convey the depth of a personal experience, but something that speaks to the larger societal realities as well. And so I wanted to create something, and I appreciate it very much that you say that is artistic and literary. I felt, as Farrah Griffin, who gave a blurb for this book, said during one of our book talks, she said, I was in conversation with the African American tradition, and I felt that very strongly and appreciated that reference. And so this is a very internal novel. I wanted to bring the reader immediately into Warrior's mind, his internal journey. I think we don't hear enough about the internal journey of young black men. I wanted people to see the complexity, the diversity, the depth that he feels. He's a young man, and he's also an old soul in certain ways. Some people have talked about the magical realism aspect of the book or the spiritual. To me, it really connects to the African American oral tradition. And I think that in this country, in America, to imagine surviving what black folks have faced is almost a form of magical realism. You had to imagine a different way, in a country that showed you there was no way. And so, to me, that is a connection to the oral tradition and to the kind of mythic characters a lot that you would find in African American folklore. And the parable and the prose aspect, it is an allegory. It's a story of one young man, but it's larger than his own experience. And to me, I wanted to connect this internal voice and journey very much with this external, larger narrative and conversation, and that's what I sought to do in Passage.
Yes, you've done it very well. But part of what I felt as in reading this is also a sense of hopelessness. There's a part of it that made me very sad, and very real. So what is you conveyed what the young man is going through, but what is the message that we have moving forward for black men in this society? And
Sure.
Warrior is symbolic of that, but you also, as you're saying, you're talking about the larger issues.
Absolutely. I think that there are aspects of the novel that convey the hopelessness that he feels and the depression and the sadness. But I also think it's a very hopeful book in the end because it's about the way out. I mean, it's about the fact that we all have so many voices in our head and in our mind that seek to push and pull us in different ways, and we have to decide which voices to listen to. And that's his struggle. Does he listen to and become overwhelmed by the voices of depression and hopelessness, or does he push through to be the man that he needs to be? And that's the work of Brotherhood Sister Soul. It's helping young people who are facing some of the most desperate conditions in this city due to poverty, economic poverty, and due to poor education. And what we say to them is that you have to understand these conditions. You know, as James Baldwin said, the victim who is able to articulate the situation of the victim has ceased to be a victim. He or she has become a threat. And what we are saying to our young people is that you have to understand these conditions so that you can become a threat to them, so that you can become a social change maker, so that you can speak out and utilize your voice. And to me, that's what the novel is about. There are definitely very sad and dark parts of the novel, but in the end, he's able to find his way due to his family love, due to his legacy, and due to the legacy of struggle of black people in this country for freedom and equality. And so I think that there's freedom that can be found in that struggle. That doesn't mean that it's not hard or difficult, and I didn't want to shy away from that. I mean, I wanted to show the brutality that he experiences due to the police. I wanted to show the brutality of the criminal justice system, but he also, you know, has so much love for his family, for his woman friend, who is his best friend, and he's trying to figure out what that means. You know, he's somebody who walks through the world with both love and anger and pain, and I think that that's reflective of a lot of our young people, and I think we have to look at that and talk about that and the trauma and the pain that so many young people feel, and then help them to navigate that world, because if not, then you end up with the adults that we have, who so many of whom are consumed by the pain and the trauma they experienced.
Well, that definitely comes across, and as you said, the love and the importance of struggle, and also the importance of remembering, and why it's important to remember. Memories play a large part of this story.
Yes.
And how memories help us to cope.
And I come from a family of storytellers, and when my uncles and my grandmother would tell stories of their experiences coming up in the South, you know, they were at times stories of terror. There were also unbelievable stories of endurance and laughter, the ability to laugh and in the midst of what was just a chaotic situation that made simply no sense. And to be raised around those kind of stories, I think it also instills in people a connection to the length of struggle in this country, which I think is extremely important. I think people can become overwhelmed, for instance, in these political times, and think that what we are seeing from the current occupant of the White House is new, as opposed to representational of something that's been here since the founding of the country and is very core to the country. And so then that changes how you struggle against it and how you move towards equity and equality when you realize you're fighting against something that has always been here.
Well, well said. Just going back to the work that you're doing in Brotherhood Sister Soul, how are you getting young people to really understand that? Can you share what some of the projects and the work that you're doing specifically in the organization?
Sure. So we have a organization that's based on our theory of change, of providing support, guidance, love, and education to children, teaching them to form discipline and order in their life, and then providing opportunities and access so they can develop agency. That's the process we move young people through, and we think central to that is a political education that's based on them understanding Pan-African and Latino history, sexism and misogyny, leadership development, global awareness. We are doing intensive education with young people, exposure for them to spend a month with us in places like Brazil and Ghana and Haiti and Cuba, and to understand the diversity of the world. It's about exposure to all the opportunities that maybe have not been afforded to them due to the schools they attend, to realize that there's so much opportunity out there for them to do innovative and powerful things, but to also connect to their history and who they are as Pan-African and Latino and Latina people. And so that's central to the work. It's everything that we do here, is that political education done from a culturally competent approach. And we think that is what instills in young people a pride and a connection to their people that allows them to push through what will be the difficult times that everybody faces. And so that work is central. There is no Brotherhood Sister Soul without the political work that we do to help young people understand issues of race and gender and class, and then to seek to become social change makers.
So can you be a little bit more specific about what actually a young person who is in your organization would do?
Sure, they would join a program where they would go from 7th to 12th grade in a single-gendered space and define what it means to be a woman or a man, a leader, a brother or sister in their community. And so they'd have 15 peers going through their adolescence in their lives, going through the same process so that they had positive peer support. They'll have 2 elders who are guiding them through that process. So every time they have a question about anything in their life, whether silly or serious, whether profane or every day, they will have somebody to talk to. That same group of young people will go on college tours and be exposed to higher education and to workforce development. If needs be, they will have support of legal representation and mental health support to navigate the difficult adolescent years. They will learn to be community organizers and go through a political education summer leadership school over the summer where they learn about social justice issues and practically what does it mean to be a community organizer. We provide 12,000 meals a year for young people, so we put food in their belly and information in their brain. So it's kind of the everyday work of doing what schools and communities and families should do, and in some cases do, but in some cases don't do. We do that in the after-school hours and the summer hours. And so a young person on average is with us 6 years and gets all of these wraparound services that helps them to develop into strong adults.
Oh, excellent, excellent. That is very inspiring. So when you look at what's happening today, you're doing the work through your organization, you're writing. What do you see as the future, given the times we're in, the future for young black men and women? We're a part of a movement now. Is it going to get stronger? Do you see it getting stronger? What is your vision of how you see us moving forward?
You know, I always call myself a realistic optimist. I'm realistic of the conditions in this country, reflected around mass incarceration, reflected around the horrific level of education that we provide, the economic disparities that continue. But it's based in, as I said, family stories. My father's side of the family, 13 generations of his family were born into slavery in this country. 4 generations were born into segregation. And my brother and I were the first generation born, quote, legally free. You had 17 generations of racially codified apartheid and or slavery in this country. And so when I speak to my grandmother, who was raised by somebody who had been enslaved for 18 years, what I realize is the context that I'm a part of. And if we were able to move through those 17 generations and be where we are now, 2 generations born legally free, what it instills in me is a belief that in the end we will win, that we will create a more equitable country, that it will be a country that reflects the beautiful diversity of, for instance, the city of New York, as opposed to what we see when we look at the halls of economic and political power in this country. So I think in the end we win. I don't know exactly how long that takes us. I don't know how many more generations it takes, but I do feel like that kind of that tidal wave of history it builds, and I don't think that there, at the end of the day, is anything that the forces of oppression can do to stop that. I think in the end we will win. That doesn't mean a huge amount of damage won't be done along the way. It doesn't mean that we will not face the many losses that we have faced and continue to face, but I do believe in the end we will win.
Well, I like the realistic optimism. So as we wind up, I'd like you to talk more about your craft, the process that you used to write this book, and what message you can give to young people who are interested in writing, because you're writing in a range of genres.
Yeah.
So why don't we start with what is your writing process and your craft?
I think one lesson I say to young people a lot is that you have to write. a lot of people say that they want to write, but you have to write. It is a craft. It's a practice. You have to consistently write.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one thing. I think the second is that writing, the old adage is rewriting is rewriting is rewriting, that it takes time to really work through certainly a novel or a longer piece of writing, and you have to really hone your language, and you have to treat it as a craft. And the most powerful poets and essayists and novelists, all the words matter. I had a wonderful writing teacher at one point when I was at the University of West Indies in Jamaica, the first poet laureate of Jamaica, Mervyn Morris, and he used to always say, keep it clean. It's another thing I always remember, that all the words you use need to be intentional. And I think that's also something that I would pass on. I also think it's important to find one's own voice. And so I really struggled in this novel to keep coming back to the story I wanted to tell, to not be afraid of using the kind of allegory and the concretized metaphors and the internal voice that we talked about, to weave in the role of music. These were aspects of the novel that I wanted to explore, and also symbolism. There's 7 chapters, and it begins with a metaphorical death, it ends with a metaphorical birth, and I wanted to really engage in that kind of tradition. And so to me it's about the practice of writing and the practice of rewriting and honing one's language, but it's also about really trying to find your own personal voice and the story you want to tell. That's what I think creates the most powerful art in all genres, but certainly in writing I think it's really key. And then I think the last thing I would say is that things take time. We live in a time right now where everything is supposed to be instant and immediate, and I think there is something about sitting and writing and finding the quiet space away from the interruptions that are constant in terms of social media and the inundation of information, and that's how one writes and creates art.
How do you do that? How do you find that space with all of the work that you're doing?
Physically and literally. I try to at times. You have to turn off the phone. You have to find quiet spaces where you can work. I'm somebody who loves to travel and believes in traveling to places where I can also find solace and quiet. There are particular times I travel for that reason, as opposed to, being inundated in a new unfamiliar city. I may try to go someplace where, the natural beauty and the physical beauty allows me to focus. Home place is extremely important, and the environment that you create, in your home that allows you to focus. So for me, those are really key pieces. I try to practice some mindfulness practices that also allow me to center my mind and allow me to focus on what I'm putting on the page, as opposed to, again, all the inundation that's floating around us currently.
That can be a real challenge.
It is
So,
absolutely
yeah.
a challenge.
Are
Yeah.
you reading when you're writing? Some people choose not to read when they're writing. Are you?
No, I read when I write. There are times where I don't want to read the same subject matter or the same theme. Let's say I'm writing a personal essay that has to do with the transformation of young people. I may not, I may at that point choose to read poetry or an autobiography. I may not want to read, Baldwin or Audre Lorde at that moment, because then it may get a little cluttered in my mind. But
Right.
I always find that reading allows my mind to escape, and there's certainly many times where poetry does that for me.
Right. Well, I always think about as writers, we're in conversations with other writers.
Yes.
So who are the people who you're in conversation with? Who are the people you're reading, and you see yourself in conversation with?
Well, I read pretty widely, so I'm in conversations with different people all the time. That's how it feels. And there are, kind of modern writers who certainly I read their work and love their work. But consistently, I think I return to, the writing of James Baldwin. I consistently return to the writing of Audre Lorde, who I've mentioned, of Gabriel Garcia Marquez. I'm very moved by the magical realism that came out of Latin America. I'm always inspired by the intersection of history and oral tradition that you find in Morrison. I am often moved as well by the American narrative that is represented by Faulkner and Melville. So there's some of those kind of folks out of history who always stay with me, and then what I'm always trying to do is to incorporate new work that pushes me to think in new ways as well.
Well, it's very, very inspiring. One of the questions I always like to ask writers is, what do you think about the value of a National Black Writers Conference? There's some people who say we really don't need that anymore. What are your thoughts on the value of having a National Black Writers Conference? As you know, this was started by John Oliver Killens.
Yep.
Was his vision. Do we still need a National Black Writers Conference?
Without question, yeah. I categorically disagree with anyone who says we don't need it. The publishing world is still overwhelmingly white. The reviewing kind of critique world is overwhelmingly white. We need a space that nurtures and supports black writers, not only the few who break through and become famous writers, but the wide expanse of voices that we need to hear from. And so I think it's absolutely critical that we have spaces that support the development of and highlight the work of black writers.
Yes, there are ways to. It's become more of a challenge to even ensure that we have that space, and that that space is open up to black writers, but also to make the general public aware of why that space is needed. Just following up, so we have the conference. What about writers' workshops?
Yeah, I think that writing workshops are key as well. And what we were talking about before, I think all of us, if writing is a craft, then we can all improve ourselves. And the most brilliant writers writing, I'm sure, would feel that their third or fourth or fifth book was more advanced than their first. I know many people have published 5 to 10 books, and that's how they talk about their work, their evolution as an artist. And so if it's a craft, and I certainly believe that it is, then workshops help us to hone our voice and to improve our skill and our talent. And I think all of us in our professions, whatever profession we choose, we need to focus on constantly professionalizing and ourselves and becoming more and more expert, developing more and more expertise in our craft.
Right. So I was really zeroing in. I probably didn't make it myself clear on the importance of writers' workshops that are focused on writers of color. I think we have currently Hurston Wright, we have the VONA, but there are writers who've spoken about the fact that there are very few workshops for writers of color. Do we need to have workshops for writers of color? Okay.
Yeah, without question. I think that again, art has played a central role, both writing and other forms of art, in the struggle in this country for freedom and equality, and that goes back to the beginning part of our conversation, the intersection of art and activism. And so I think we need to create more spaces for writers of color, for black writers to be supported in all the ways that we've talked about. I think it's absolutely critical.
Okay. So I want to thank you so much for sharing your story with us, for writing this very, very moving novel of a young black man growing up in urban America, Warrior, who's an old soul. He's a very old soul with many, many memories. And I want to commend you for the work that you're doing. I love the way that you have combined your activism and the importance of creating venues and spaces for young people to see how they can change the world and become change agents. It's very much in an alignment with the work that we do at Medgar Evers College, we attempt to do, and also the Center for Black Literature. We're doing that kind of work, and we should really talk about how we can maybe have some partnerships and do some work together.
That would be great.
Yeah, and I just want to encourage our audience to go out and purchase Passage. This is a very, very moving book. As I said, it's very literary. It's very real. It's kind of haunting. A lot of memories kept coming back. So I thank you for doing this work. What's your next project?
My next writing project is to try to tell a little bit of the story of Brotherhood, Sister Soul, to write a book of nonfiction that covers the work that we've talked about on today's call. And there's also another novel in my mind I'm working through. That's as much as I can say at this point.
Okay. Okay, so thank you once again. You have been listening to Writers on Writing with Brenda Green, Director of the National Black Writers Conference, Executive Director of the Center for Black Literature. I want to thank Marvin, our engineer, for helping put this on. And again, thank you. Go out and purchase Passage. You can get it online. You can ask for it in your bookstore. I see this book as one that's going to resonate and be here for a long time. And I can see, I think this is the kind of book we need in our curriculum.
Thank you. That would be wonderful, and I appreciate the time and the powerful conversation with you today. Thank you so much.
You're welcome. This is Writers on Writing. Remember, the writer is always reading, the reader is always writing. Keep reading and writing. Empower yourselves as readers and writers. And write us at writers@mec.cuny.edu. Thank you.
Rivers I have seen and rivers